Welcome, everyone, to another edition of 45 Forward, where our mission is to help you, our listeners, from Los Angeles to Long Island, make the second half of life even better than the first. In an age when health care is driven by specialization and technology, Dr. Stephen Post is a rare and remarkable blend of scientist and humanist, a best-selling author and transformative speaker who has inspired thousands of people with his acclaimed work on the human side of medicine. In today's episode, Dr. Post, who is director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York, will talk about how we can educate our medical students and professionals to foster an approach to compassionate flourishing, supporting the healing and well being of patients by uplifting the full measure of their being, including their sense of purpose and social roles. From the start, there's been a spiritual side to Dr. Post's work. In caregiving, a continuous exploration of positive psychology, altruism, love, happiness, and the mystery of the human mind. He'll talk about his groundbreaking research into the dynamics of compassionate care of persons with dementia and their caregivers, as well as the striking phenomenon of unexpected lucidity of deeply forgetful people. And broadening on the issues of bioethics, Stephen will tackle the troubling issue of the widespread lack of public trust in medicine, as well as other sectors and institutions in society. So now let's meet our guest, Stephen G. Post. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's a delight to be with you.
It's a delight to have you back. For those of you who have been listening to my show for a while, this is Stephen's second appearance. He was actually, you can listen to his last show, which was a really good show, actually. It was just before Thanksgiving in 2022, November 21st. And you can find it if you go to my website, roelresources.com, and click on the 45 Forward tab and just search for Stephen Post, and you'll find it. It's a great show, but we're going to continue with another great show. So,
Yes, indeed.
yes. So, if you also, if you go to that post, you'll find, Stephen's background. He's got an incredible, interesting background. So rather than take a lot of the show describing it, I'm just going to actually jump ahead to how you came to Stony Brook and to found this Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics, because this is really a different kind of enterprise and very truly unique. So tell us about this. How did you come to create this center?
Well, I came here from Case Medical School in Cleveland, Ohio, and that was after 20 years there. We had a department of bioethics, which was important. We managed the complex quandaries of medical decision making from an ethical perspective. Do you really want to use a feeding pig in a 92-year-old man with dementia or not? That's a
Hmm.
quandary. It's a yes or no kind of question. But I wanted to do something much broader than that because I was interested in identity formation for the students around uh, compassionate care, self-care, equality in their view of the universe and the patient base. So this seemed like a good place to do it. They offered me an opportunity to build something, and the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics. It sounds like a lot, but it makes sense because we have lots of time with the students preclinically to study the great literary works of medicine. Students read the writings of Chekhov. They read When Breath Becomes Air. They read all these wonderful works about the illness experience.
Mm.
And the intention there is that hopefully this will continue to elicit from within them empathic qualities,
Hmm.
because you have to have an image of a feel for a patient before you can really be empathic.
Mm.
And so humanities, compassionate care, and then bioethics. Most of the bioethics consultations that people do in hospitals these days, at Stony Brook, but every place, they go best if individuals just take the time to listen to the story, the narrative of their patients,
Hmm.
kind of let that settle in. And with that sensibility, they can usually manage these very difficult dilemmas, some of which are life and death, they can manage them better.
Right.
So that's where it all makes sense.
Hmm.
I was happy to come here, although it wasn't easy to leave Cleveland, that's for sure.
Hmm.
I know it's hard to understand if you're on Long Island and you've lived here all your life, but it's gone well, and we've been very successful.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's hard to leave home wherever that, you are. And I think especially after 20 years, but sometimes you have opportunities. And I think I'm happy that Stony Brook brought you there. Um, I think that, it's having a feel like this, I think is we're more than on the cusp. I think we're really into this, the issue of caregiving in a much more substantial way than years ago. But I imagine that your students are probably both grateful for this sort of course, but also a little surprised. Or are they surprised that when they encounter this? Like when you mentioned, oh, you're going to learn a little bit from Chekhov. They're like, what? Not anatomy? The anatomy of
Yeah, yeah,
Chekhov?
that's right. Well, the language of science still predominates, and it must in this
Hmm.
environment, but that doesn't mean it should predominate the culture.
Hmm.
The culture is still a matter of care and compassion, attentive listening, kindness, feeling connected with your work and its meaning, and being excited to be helping others. That's really what the culture is about. So
Hmm.
science doesn't provide that. It provides an awful lot of good information, and it's important that the students do well in their basic science courses. But it's much more than that. We need physician scientists, but we also need physician humanists.
Hmm.
And you can't really separate those things. The great physicians, the greatest, are always both.
Right, right. And I think that there are several levels to it. I think in some cases, um, the compassionate care and the listening and the communication actually improves the medicine, right? And you find out more about the patients, and by listening to them, that goes beyond the clinical observations. You listen to their stories.
Yes, Sir William Osler, considered by many to be the father of modern medicine, at least in North America, he said, just listen to your patients and they will tell you their diagnosis. I mean, you can ask intelligent questions when you're trying to get a differential diagnosis, and that's important. But he felt that actually, if you just give the patient a feeling of safety,
Hmm.
kind of circle of trust in a relationship of compassion, and don't interrupt them, but just listen and let them know that you're listening, and maybe reflect things back from time to time. I think you're saying this, he felt that you would get more information relevant to an accurate diagnosis that way than any other way. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. People think about a diagnosis, they want to get all the latest printouts from a computer down the
Hmm.
hallway, and that's important. You can get some great facts, but in the final analysis, you have to stop, look, and listen,
Hmm.
and be there with the patient. Stop, look, and listen, we call it,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
SSLL.
Right.
And we try to build that into the experience of the students and faculty, because
Yeah.
otherwise they're just running around from point A to point B at the speed of light, and there's no room sociologically, chronologically, for them to easily connect with patients. So stop, just stop where you are before you go into the room of a new patient. Breathe, somewhat mindful and meditational in a way. Take a deep breath. Then when you go in, um, look and listen,
Hmm.
and that can make a huge difference in terms of uh, avoiding medical mistakes, because 70% of medical mistakes are due to premature diagnostic closure. That's probably a new phrase for some of
Mm.
your listeners, but it basically means, you have to slow it down a little bit and be attentive, and don't just think that you've got all the answers because you've got a test in a printout in your hand.
Right, right. It's it's interesting when you say stop, look, and listen. You know what I think of, uh, just experientially is when I was a kid crossing the street. That's what they used to tell us when you wait, stop, look, and listen. And but the same three commands are important so you don't get hit by a car, or And I think again, sort of that those basic precepts work to avoid accidents, as you said. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so true.
yeah.
So we enjoy what we do, and the students come here actually when they apply, they get a nice brochure in the mail uh, from our center through the admissions program, and we do attract a lot of students because we have a history and a strength in
Mhm,
these fields. Of course,
mhm,
there's a lot of great science that goes on here and a lot of great clinical people,
mhm,
and many of them are in fact uh, physician humanists as well
mhm.
as great
Right.
scientists.
Yeah. Now, how do you teach the students these values? I mean, I know that I was looking at the center's website. I mean, there are three basic components: humanities and illness experience, virtues, clinical ethics. What's the process about, instilling these values and observations in your students?
Well, there are many, many ways to do this, and one has to be innovative and um, try to measure success
Hmm.
to the extent that it's possible. So, for example, in American medical schools uh, around all the United States, um, there is a problem, which is that students come to these schools. Many of them are wanting to be empathic, and they have pretty high empathic qualities. But when they get into the clerkship year, where they're doing all their clinical experiences for the first time, they actually see a slight decline in uh, in empathy
Hmm.
among the students. I think it's because, again, they're in a new environment. It's very time pressured, and they're picking up skill sets, and they're also seeing role modeling that's in general quite good, but not always evenly so.
Hmm.
Billy Joel, world's been burning since the world's been turning. It's not that bad, but
Hmm.
it can get pretty unimpressive at some points in terms of role modeling.
Right.
And role modeling is so important because that's how the torch gets passed from generation to generation. It's not
Hmm.
didactic. It's not downloading stuff from a PowerPoint. And so what we do is we have all the students in every clerkship step out for just an hour and a half, um, once or twice during a 6 week block, and just small groups of maybe 6 or 7 students, um, convened by somebody on the faculty who is committed to this activity and has some psychological skills. And it's in their camp, and they're asked to talk about their best role models, and they can be very graphic about someone who took the hand of a patient and was just incredibly empathic and made such a difference, and the patient was so happy and so grateful and flourished in so many different ways. And that means tone of voice, facial expression, word choice, all kinds of things. But then they're asked to reflect on the not so great role models. And this is everywhere. It's not, I mean, every medical school has a mix. And so they talk about some things they might have witnessed that uh, kind of troubled them. Maybe
Hmm.
when they got out to the parking lot, left them wondering in their cars.
Right.
I won't go into examples, but there could be any number of examples that I could just uh, provide off the tip of my tongue here. And through having that, and then we asked them, so how did you address that? Did you just internalize it and say, okay, that's not how I want to practice medicine? You
Hmm.
can learn a lot from negative role models. Um, or did you actually proceed a little further and maybe try to have a positive influence on your learning environment. So one story that I sometimes draw on, um, and this is not Stony Brook specific, but maybe it is. So, uh, a young guy who is on his clerkship, and he hears his team making a derisive joke about an a highly overweight woman
Hmm.
that they're treating, and the team is laughing. This is kind of thing happens in these
Sure.
environments. And the young man, verbatim, he asked himself, do I want to laugh with my team? He thought, if I laugh with my team, I will ingratiate myself
Hmm.
and maybe I'll get a better evaluation. Um, he said, no, I don't want to laugh with them. Do I even want to smile? He said, no, I don't even want to smile. He just stood there passively. And then a nurse, a wonderful nurse, came along and put her arm around this fellow's shoulder and said, hey, I noticed how you handled yourself. It was beautiful. Thank you for being this way. Maybe you want to consider, diplomatically, of course, approaching the team toward the end of the afternoon and telling them how you as a student experienced this. And the young guy did this. He actually approached the team and he said, I'm a medical student and I'm here because I think we need to be physician humanists. We need to be compassionate. We can't be doing derisive jokes about quote unquote whales, as they say.
Hmm.
And the team was very responsive. It was wonderful, and they embraced this young guy, and they said, thank you. We were really off track, and we won't let it happen again. So he felt empowered. He wasn't just passively imbibing an uneven environment. He actually had a positive influence,
Right.
and it strengthened him. And so our study, which appeared in Academic Psychiatry, shows that our students actually do not have that decline.
Right.
Um, it's not that they get more empathic in that
Hmm.
uh, heavy year of clinical experience, but they don't decline, and that's a positive.
Great. Great. So, Stephen, this is great. I need to just take a quick break. But folks, when we come back, we'll be talking much more with Dr. Stephen Post, the director of the for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony Brook University. So don't go away. We have a lot more to talk about. Welcome back, folks. We're talking today with Dr. Stephen Post, an international speaker, best-selling author, and director for the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony Brook University. So before the break, we were talking about really, Stephen was talking about offering a story, and in a sense talked about what we really mean about compassionate care in the course of medical treatment, and what that meant in terms of language, and uh, so one of the projects I mentioned during the break was called Project Muse, this notion of joining humanity and science. And I just wanted Stephen to talk a little bit about that notion of uh, really sort of a higher calling, of this sort of education and practice.
Well, it is in the broadest sense spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We use a lot of positive psychology. We teach classes in positive psychology. I teach a class with a whole number of uh, more advanced upper class medical students, the compassion toolkit,
Mm.
and it's got some didactics, readings. It goes on for about a whole month and meets 3 times a week. But it's mainly about actual practices that have been cultivated around the country. For example, Stanford followed us. We had this idea of a Center for Humanities, Compassion, and Bioethics. Stanford then developed a whole center for compassionate care. And now UCSD, University of California, San Diego, has a compassionate care
Mm.
program, and they're cropping up all over the place
Mm.
because people realize that, even when you have the students reading beautiful narratives about patient experiences, and that's very important, When they come in here for the summer program, the Introduction to Medical School, we always have them read a great book, something that really brings them to tears and connects them with the experience of hope and distress
Mm-hmm.
and meaning in a patient. But ultimately, it's more than that. They actually learn uh, to stop, look, and listen. They learn techniques of breathing when they feel that they're somehow getting on edge and about to react uh, to uh, to a patient or a colleague. So this allows them to step back a little bit and respond instead of react. We actually have a whole booklet of ideal empathic communication, because there's so much violent communication, not here, but I mean in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and they see that all the time, and it's so easy to get caught up in it. But what we do is, we say, it's better to sometimes ask a question than have a too simple answer. A lot of times it's better to be indirect than direct. A lot of times you want to have attention to your tone of voice, to the fine details of how you connect with somebody. You want to be there in a full sense. And we actually do exercises about this. We do what are called verbatim exercises. This will
Mm-hmm.
amuse you. So a student will engage with a patient and then will, after that engagement, write down in fine detail, without identifying anybody, of course, because of confidentiality, but
Mm-hmm.
in fine detail, the nature of the conversation. So patient says X, student says Y, patient says X, student says Y. It can be a whole page. It's like a small uh, one-act play. And you can even capture that, family comes in with flowers or whatever. And then sit down with your colleagues, with 5 or 6 colleagues in your peer group, and you go over, you read this through, and they're asking, so why did you say this then and not something else? Or why did you kind of veer away from addressing this particular concern? And what it does is it allows the student, well, they feel like they're a little bit on the skillet, but
Mm-hmm.
it's all very positive. But they have to really reflect on why they said what they said, when they said it, how they said it.
Mm-hmm.
And they even do simulated clinical interactions, and we try to capture some of that with
Mm-hmm.
them. But this is the way that people in clinical pastoral care or in clinical social work learn to communicate
Mm-hmm.
through these so-called verbatim interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're fabulous. Now, of course, again, it can be challenging because you can feel like somehow, what was I not willing to talk about? What was I avoiding? Why was I a little bit
Mm-hmm.
aggressive? Why, what was going on there? And so it's very introspective, but you need to make people aware of what they're saying and why they're saying it and how they're saying it and what they're not saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an important concept, an important part of the treatment. And I think this is one of the things that people are disturbed about today in medicine. I mean, um, they're feeling that they're not really cared for, that the medical care is missing the care component. And I understand in some cases it's about economics. Um, and yet, it seems to me that this can be integrated. I think that so the economics are that a lot of individual practitioners are getting they can't manage it, so they join practices, and then those practices get bought by bigger practices, and so you have a medical corporation. Um, it just does seem though that within that framework, you still can have doctors who, when they meet with you, um, do more than just say, okay, why are you here? And
Mm.
and and I think there is, you do feel like the early days of industrialization, where you had these time motion experiments where you had to get a certain amount done within a certain amount of time, and a certain amount of product delivered. And you come out and you say like, okay, I guess my test showed okay, but I don't, I don't know that he really knows me at all, other than my data. Um, and so I think that I think it may be a while coming. And I think that there are a lot of countervailing pressures against doctors these days, right? I mean, there's always the medical malpractice and insurance and all these so it's hard. It's hard, but I think this adds a lot on both sides, patient and doctor.
But we want our students to have compassion, even for doctors who are, shall we say, running on empty.
Mm-hmm.
Medical care, as you talk about it in general, you come in for medical care. That means, a shot in the arm, an X-ray, uh, you know, you get your temperature taken, but it's really not care in the deepest sense.
Right.
So we would like to see medical care more profoundly offered. And I think many schools have good programs in the medical humanities, and I think many students actually. I find I've been in medical education now, oh my God, for almost 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 20 years at Case Western, 15 years here. That seems like a long time because it
Mm-hmm.
is. But I think in general, um, the students have gotten incredibly idealistic about how they want to interact with patients, and they learn techniques about incorporating compassionate care and communication into their daily practice. And there are things you can do. For example, in primary care, there are a certain number of patients who they just want to get in there and they want to get the hell out of there because they're on the
Right.
way to work.
Right.
They don't want any nice interactions, particularly.
True. True.
They're there. And so what you want, and they may take, literally 5 minutes and then they're out the door. But then, there are other patients who really need 15 or 20 minutes or even a half an hour or an hour. And so if you schedule them later in the day, it makes sense because then you're not holding up all these folks who just want to get in and out. So there are different things to be done. And also people get better at connecting with patients. It's not just, as one of my colleagues, Jack Houlihan says, it's not just the time that's involved, but it's also the ability to be present.
Mm-hmm.
And presence is almost an intuitive kind of thing, but some folks can do a great deal in a very short time. I was in Cleveland for 20 years, living in Shaker Heights, a wonderful inner ring suburb, and I used to interact with the Cleveland Clinic quite a bit. They did a study where they looked at patients who had had major surgery on their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Edit, okay. At the Cleveland Clinic, they did a study to see if patients having undergone major open heart surgery were getting out quicker or slower, and of course, reasonably well healed. That's the
Mm-hmm.
caveat, right?
Right.
And it turns out that the most important factor in determining when they would actually get out of the hospital was the extent to which they could self-report an empathic surgeon. Now, you could have wonderful nurses around, social workers, and all kinds of other people, but there was something about the primacy of that relationship between the surgeon and the patient. Because after all, the patient is entrusting themselves
Right.
to the OR room, and they don't know if they're coming out of that alive or not. So that sense of the empathy of the surgeon made a huge difference in terms of people getting out, say 20% sooner than they would have otherwise. But again, emphasis well healed. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not just out on the street. And I think that tells you that love heals. I mean, to put it in that simple sense, when people feel treated kindly, and there's a difference between kindness and empathy. Kindness is like, it doesn't take a lot of conversation. You don't have to understand your patient very well, but at least you can have the kindness of saying, well, how's things with your family, and how's this going? How's the job? Simple
Mhm.
acts of kindness are easy to do.
Right.
And then there's empathy, which is a little more involved, because then you're asking, so um, tell me about this, and did I get that right? And you're going back through a kind of reflective exercise. And then when empathy is in the context of suffering, then you have compassion. So I call compassion the expression of uh, empathy, uh, affective empathy. It's not
Mhm.
just, sort of getting the role modeling right and the wordplay right, but affective empathy, that sense of presence in the context of suffering. And some people, some patients, some students, I'm sorry, and professionals aren't that comfortable around suffering. They want
Mm.
to head for the hills.
Right. Right.
But and that's okay. People can be different,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
to some extent will determine what they do with their careers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think everybody should be compassionate to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have students. One of the most empathic students who graduated last year, a wonderful guy who wrote a beautiful article in a leading journal based on looking at kindness, at the concept of kindness. He'd done a survey. He'd done qualitative interviews. His beautiful article. It got a lot of attention. He went into anesthesiology, and he's in Chicago now. And the reason he went into anesthesiology, he said many times, was because he felt that before patients go in for major surgery, they really need kindness,
Mm.
because they're likely to be anxious. They're wondering if this is it,
Mhm.
what will happen. And so you need an anesthesiologist who connects with people in a calming way that gives them some tranquility, and that would probably help them through the whole process.
Right.
By the way, stress, as most people listening will know, stress is, at least in the long term, is not very good for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, in the short term, it's fight, flight. It'll, give you a burst of energy and you can run away from a
Right.
crocodile.
Right.
But but if it's protracted, and it's part of your longer term experience, it slows down wound healing by about 10-15%. That's not a controversial statement.
Mhm.
It also transitions metabolites into fatty acids, which is bad for your vascular system. And now almost every neurologist I know uh, tells me that they think stress is an important factor in the context of dementia,
Mhm.
because studies show that people who are, regularly stressed out have what's called hippocampal atrophy, a little shrinkage of the hippocampus,
Right.
which lays down new memory.
Mhm.
So in that sense, in the broadest sense, kindness, empathy, compassion, they do heal.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'd like to pursue that a little bit more. We're going to come up with a break shortly, but I don't want to end our interview without going into a little bit more about your work with dementia patients with respect to this, because I think this is an important contribution you've made and continue to make. You wrote a groundbreaking book several years ago, and you followed up with the one. Uh, and it's something we don't know. As much as we know, we don't know a lot about it. And that's the troubling thing, and the hard to accept thing, because it's so difficult for so many families to really understand. We are trying hard, but there's just so much we don't know. Um, so I want to, when we come back from the break, let's talk about that. But we do need to take a short break. So when we come back, folks, we'll be talking much more in our last segment with Dr. Stephen Post, the director for the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony University. So don't go away. We have much more to talk about. Welcome back, folks. We're talking with Dr. Stephen Post, an international speaker and best-selling author, director for the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at Stony Brook University. Um, Now, before we go on, I just wanted to mention to folks, because sometimes we get involved in our conversation and get close to the end. And I just wanted to, before we do that, let people know, Stephen, how do they find out more about the center and about your work.
Well, the center has a wonderful website.
Okay.
It's filled with student papers and experiences and awards. We actually, as a center and as a school, won the most coveted award in medical education,
Hmm.
the Alpha Omega Alpha Award for Professional Identity Formation,
Hmm.
if you will.
Wow.
And that only goes to one school a year, if that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a recognition that what you're doing is making a difference in shaping the character and the virtues of your students.
Hmm.
And I think our curriculum is at least one. There are other good ones here and there, but I think ours is leading the way in many respects. So it's a great website. It's www.stonybrook.edu and then / bioethics.
Okay. Good. Okay.
And then for me, it would be Stephen with a PH, gpost.com.
Okay. Very good. Okay, good. I wanted to get that in because you and I often get involved and
Yes.
and we get to the end without the sign off. So that's great. Okay. So now back to our discussion, um, talking about compassionate care, but particular with um, patients or people with dementia, because this is something that is, well, it's increasingly important in our society. There are more, there are greater numbers of dementia patients, or rather, I'd say people with dementia, because of longevity. That's the upside, and the downside is that as you get older, although it's not caused by age, the risk increases with age. And I think that one of your major contributions goes to your basic approach, which is a lot of it's about the communication, about the thinking about the caregiving for these people, not just the clinical treatments, which are coming. I know people are working hard on it, diligent, but it's coming slow because it's so complicated. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about, because you have a couple of books, and the last one I believe is The Moral Challenge of Alzheimer's Disease, Ethical Issues from Diagnosis to Dying, or well, then there's Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, right? How caregivers can meet the challenges of Alzheimer's disease. Um,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of challenges. So talk about, how your notion of compassionate care fits with Alzheimer's.
Well, well, both with Johns Hopkins University Press, which is a good venue for this particular topic. Um, Dignity for deeply forgetful people. That's a language that may surprise some of the listeners. I do not much like the word dementia.
Mm,
It's a language of decline from a former mental state, which is scientifically accurate, but it reminds me a little bit of the word retard.
mm,
We don't call people retarded. We call them differently abled or whatever it might be. Um, so when you think about the word dementia and you hear how it's used in certain clinical settings, it invites negative metaphors.
hmm
Husk, gone, shell, empty, dead. And it can be very dangerous. The Germans in the late 1930s had a program called Tiergestrasse 4, where they took people with dementia out of asylums and nursing homes, 70,000 of them, and subjected them to hypothermia
mm,
experiments and
wow,
literally froze them to death and then brought them back into these facilities and tried to warm them up in different venues at different radiant temperatures.
wow,
And that was so troubling that it was stopped. But the same investigators took the hypothermia experiments directly to Dachau and Auschwitz and so forth when the Germans invaded Poland.
wow.
And these were not people who were um, racially uh, 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 derided. These were, if you will, Aryans, people of the blood and so forth.
hmm
But they had one thing going against them. They were deeply forgetful.
Mm.
So I view deep forgetfulness as a very positive term in the sense that it encourages us to get closer to these individuals and to realize that we can notice things about them. One of the key themes in the book Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People is what's called unexpected lucidity.
Mm.
We just did a Gallup survey, national Gallup survey, at some considerable expense. And what we found out is that 40% of caregivers, primary, secondary, professional, have had very vivid accounts of individuals they thought were completely gone. But with some with stimulation through music, maybe through art, maybe through the right interactions, maybe even through the fall leaves, because they still have consciousness and they can appreciate the
Mm.
beauty of nature. But these individuals would come back into themselves a little bit, and they could even, in some cases, converse.
Mm.
So that may sound almost peculiar to some, but you have to take the time to notice this. And in New York, in New York City, they have something called the Unforgettables Choir,
Mm.
where
Mhm.
caregivers and people who are deeply forgetful uh, practice. They actually have practices, of music that is familiar to them, and they do concerts on a monthly basis. There's a Brooklyn Center for the Memory Disabled, and they have Alzheimer's poets.
Mhm.
So you can bring in 30 or 40 people who are deeply forgetful, I would say, and they're not communicating at all with their loved ones. Their heads are down, they're kind of drooped. And then if a poet in the room with animation, with color, with life, reads some poem that this cohort would be familiar with, like, say, The Road Less Traveled,
Mhm.
or The Mending Wall, something there is that does not love a wall. Uh, I would tell you that 80% of these individuals will chime in unexpectedly, and it's not necessarily that they'll recite the whole verse, but if you use this language appropriately, they will maybe repeat. They'll recite a few words. Some will recite a few lines, and some will stand up and actually give you the whole poem.
Mm.
So, and there's a wonderful guy uh, here on Long Island who started an organization called Music in Memory.
Right.
And they did a video called Alive Inside of using familiar music to stimulate these kinds of returns to relative lucidity. They're fleeting, but for a few seconds after this stimulation, people can actually respond to rightly asked questions.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a skill in the back of my book. I have a very careful chapter on communication techniques. So
Mhm.
you don't ask somebody, "What would you like for breakfast?" Because then you're putting them on the spot. They have to dig into their memory and come up with language.
Right.
But if you say, "Would you like post raisin bran or an omelet?" They'll say, "Oh, of course, an omelet." you
Right.
know so
Right.
you have to use language in a way that cues them. But people who get very, very skilled at using language can break through and do pretty well.
Right.
So I have so many stories, hundreds of stories of uh, 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 people. I was at a nursing home in Chardon, Ohio, with Joe Foley, who was my great mentor at Case Western. He did all the differential diagnoses of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and so forth for the National Institutes of Health years and years ago, and was a
Mhm.
co-founder of the Alzheimer's Association. He was a great Boston Irishman who'd come from Harvard to Case Western. And we went out to a nursing home that was uh, really quite sophisticated.
Mhm.
And he he and I went into a special care unit for people with deep forgetfulness.
Mhm.
And we read the little bio sketch on the wall, which is always a good idea. So caregivers knew that somebody had a life. It's very humanizing. So this was Jim, and he'd had two kids, and he had been in accounting and so forth. And he loved skiing, and he loved canoeing. And so we went out into the main unit, and there were a lot of maybe 20 or so people ambulating. And I asked the nurse, could you show me Jim? So she brought me over to Jim, and I took Jim by the hand and we sat down. And I used language wrongly.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Jim, how are your sons? And he was anxious and startled. But then I said, wait a minute, Jim, how's Zach? The name of
Right.
one of his sons. And that cued him. And then he lit up. And I'll tell you, if joy was electric, the place would have been on fire. And I said,
Right.
how's Luke? Same thing.
Right.
So if I used language to draw him into this, he came alive inside. It was beautiful.
Right.
And then, okay, here's a story for you.
Okay. Quick
There
one
was,
though.
okay, you know those rag dolls, puppet dolls that
Mhm.
sometimes you give your daughter for
Right.
birthdays? On the floor in front of him was an old beaten up rag doll. It looked like it was built in or made in 1920. And he ambulated around and he actually picked it up. And he took it over to the corner where there was a woman crying on a couch.
Mhm.
And he placed it on her lap. And she stopped crying. And then I asked the nurse, so what's the story with that puppet doll? And the nurse said, well, that was her puppet doll. And a lot of people have, they may not have linear rationality, but they have symbolic rationality. They know that their life is connected with a particular symbolic object.
Mhm.
So as soon as she had that in her lap, she stopped crying and she started smiling.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there was a culture going on there.
Right.
And Jim was pretty emotionally intelligent.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating, and I think that this does fit into your whole approach of compassionate care. This is the communication and understanding this. So part of it is the care, and I think the other dimension that that you've mentioned, and why I think that changing the language or using the language of deeply forgetful is not just euphemistic. It's basically it's what we know. It's what we know. We don't really know what the demented behavior really is. What we know is that they're deeply forgetful, and they're it could be for many different reasons. But I think it does show a certain compassion and a certain and it's more effective. I think this kind of care actually helps people medically. Well, there's so much more to talk about, but we'll have to leave it there for today, Stephen, and come back and invite you back for
Sure.
another show to talk more about bioethics and some of how that fits in. I think some of it for me is about humility and just what you've discovered is how much we know and don't know.
Right.
But we'll save that for another show because there's a lot more to talk about. But let me just say that once again, folks, if you've missed my conversation with Stephen today, you can listen to it as a podcast at voiceamerica.com. Just search for my show, 45 Forward. You can also listen to it on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or go to my website, roelresources.com, and just click on the 45 Forward tab and search for Stephen's podcast. Um, so, with that, we're going to have to move on to our next week. But again, I want to thank you, Stephen, for a terrific show. Much appreciated. Be sure to join me next Monday, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, when I'll be talking with Asher Rabinowitz. He's a veteran social worker specializing in substance abuse treatment, which he employs a simple but not easy approach, which he calls the ABC method. You want to hear it. It's an interesting approach and actually deals with a lot of some of the communication issues that Stephen raised. So you'll want to listen in to that show as well. So until then, folks, keep moving forward, 45 forward.